floor to conclude the negative team's case and its substantive case.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make two confessions at the start of this speech. First of all, I'd like to apologise for mistaking this for the semi-final of the Australasian picnicking tournament. Second of all, I'd like to confess that development is difficult, and we recognise that in this debate, that sometimes states struggle to attract interest because they have difficulties in governance. And it wasn't our burden in this debate to show that Africa would magically change right now. What we've said is that you undermine the incentives for states to bring development and bring increased living standards to the majorities of people that wouldn't be living in these special economic zones. You've increased sovereign risks for that majority, who were an important part of the debate. And the wager at the other side, as conceded in the dying minutes of the third firm he speaks, was the chance that perhaps in these economic zones some advantages could be reached. We weren't willing to sacrifice the majority on the negative side in this debate. First of all, I'm going to deal with that majority, development of those that can be left out of the economic zones, and second of all, I'm going to talk about the paltry benefits they'd actually get to those that live within them. To this first question about development in general. By second affirmative, it became clear that the states we were talking about were some of the worst in the world, some of the ones that struggle the most in attracting foreign investment. What we said is that sovereign risk would be a deterrent for the widespread rollout of your model in the first place. Because what you said is that you must maintain trade with this state. So you must maintain the kind of economic relationships which we stood for on the negative. Second of all, you have to have a number of their local population that you conceded were often fighting within themselves and often lacked education, and often resented the governments they lived under. And finally, you said the enforcement of this contract was through invasion. And we accept that invasions wouldn't happen all the time under the system. But the risk of a possibility of invasion, especially when you can't forecast the development of a despotic state over 99 years necessarily, means that people are less likely to take up these contracts in the first place. But they also pointed to reason that even if they did, you wouldn't necessarily get other people looking upon that investment favourably, because it wasn't clear at that point that you could control your investment. Elle gave you the example of how North Korea had sold a section of their land, and that went belly up for the investor that invested there, because people were worried about what was going on over the border and the economic situation around this island. Because we don't necessarily think that countries exist as an island, especially if you're contractually obliged to engage and trade constantly over 99 years with this despotic state that you're going to rely on, who's piping your water in order to make these lands developable in the first place. We thought that was incredibly problematic in this debate. But furthermore, we thought the majority of people existed outside fortress development in this debate. And we thought for those people, conditions were fundamentally undermined. Because it's true that we couldn't necessarily change things overnight. When you say, as a message, our government is so terrible, we are having to sell off the sovereignty of our people, we think that makes corporations less likely to invest in the rest of the country in the first place. When you change the conception of a government that its role of sovereignty is just to literally distribute and redistribute land rather than protect that land for the future interests of these people, we thought that was incredibly problematic. And when you change the capacity of ours to use investment to change that government for everyone, we thought that was terrible. Because they said it second, they love foreign direct investment, they love state aid. They're problematic for your side, because it's a bit mutually exclusive. Because when you can sell off a portion of your land for a giant one-off payment, rather than engaging with Western states that impose conditions on the loans they're giving, they'll be far more attractive to despotic regimes that don't want to change. Problematic for your side, because now when MNC is going to this country, they're going to be like, oh, no, we don't want to just buy your land, we want to buy your right to govern, and unless you give us one, we're not going to give you the other. And we think that the development that happens to the rest of that society, and the coercion this would have on states that wouldn't necessarily want to opt in to selling off their sovereignty, is problematic for the rest of the people that live in that country. But also, as Elle said, we don't necessarily think that Africa is going backwards. We think it's going forwards. The imperative they brought to us in this debate was a lie. Like Angola is a classic example. They said it first of all in the characterization of this debate, we might be able to oil things, mine resources in the ground. As those multinational corporations were leaving oil in the ground under the status quo. Like Angola is an oil-rich, increasingly wealthy state right now. I think the Central African Republic has astronomical growth rates as the other example that they used in this debate. But furthermore, we didn't think they'd change the calculation with sweatshops, because now what the government presents to people is two options. One, we carve up the state and separate our national family. Or two, we have sweatshops. We think that means sweatshops are more justifiable for these states, because we've never proved in this debate that citizens would actually want this. And the reason they kind of consider they wouldn't is their faux referendum, right? What happens when you hold your faux referendum and it loses and then you sign a deal? What about the population transfer and the way they engage with that corporate actor and whether people would trust the stability of this economic zone then? What about people left outside that economic zone that clearly didn't like it and the resentment they're going to hold to this state and what that's going to mean 50 years down the track? Because populist tyrannical governments with populations that hate their neighbours often invade them. We think that's going to be incredibly problematic when you didn't think that people would support this in the process. They said the role of, we value sovereignty, we value a right to sell it. We thought this role fell with governments as representatives of the people, but not with governments in of themselves. They couldn't sell off land that might not be developable now, but might be developable later on in the future. And it undermined the incentive for agents to provide another solution to states that would otherwise do this. So we went to the economic zone for themselves. They said there's a chance they might end up with wages which they conceded were less than wages in Ohio. We thought, yeah, maybe, perhaps if these economic zones exist, and maybe perhaps if they're trusted as stable areas, and maybe perhaps if there's lots of them despite the circumstances of your model, we thought you might get minor benefits for these people, but they were only minor, weighing up against the damages you were doing to the majority of that population. The reason they were minor is because they were talking about these better MNCs, but couldn't clarify who they were. The interests of capital don't change just because you've given more authority to capital. And capital still wants to exploit these people. You've just given them more power to do that. The reason they said that wouldn't happen is, first of all, in the future, you want to be able to buy up more land, so you're worried about your market image. Well, the despotic state that you wanted to talk about aren't going to care what happens to their citizens, because according to your characterization, they don't care what happens to their citizens now. So you can fuck up the CAR and then go to Angola and they'll still shell shit to you if we buy your characterization of how these governments operate. The second thing they said is the WTO will enforce it. Well, okay, on negative, the WTO will enforce it. Like, the WTO clearly won't enforce it. That's a blanket promise any debater can make in a speech, but clearly isn't going to exist. The final thing they said is legitimacy. How much has the UAE cared about the way that it's treated immigrant workers terribly who moved to the UAE, right? The international image of China and the UAE have weathered the storms of harming people's rights in the past. And the kind of state-based corporations, the kind of multinational corporations that are dealing with sweatshops at the moment would be likely to be attracted to this model, and the kind of states that oppress people currently are likely to be attracted to the model by your concession with the examples of China and UAE, and not going to care about their international legitimacy. We thought the skills that we would develop would only necessarily have to be enough that these individuals would produce things for that corporation, and not necessarily enough that they would start questioning and evolving in terms of liberalism. We thought the example of Britain in Hong Kong was different, because that was the incentive of Britain there was that they were civilizing the world, rather than necessarily just extracting profits from the 99-year lease as a deal. And we think that the way that's different, well, we think that's different. Well, I was inverted commas, like, sorry. So the other thing that we think in this debate is they were likely to damage intergenerational quality because they only had to be there for 99 years. But Hong Kong was a good example for our side because it's not necessarily politically integrated. That exists as a community that considers its interests before China. So we didn't necessarily think that all the benefits would flow back to the state. But they wouldn't be as well as the Hong Kong people because there's no incentive under its interest to do more than slightly better than a sweatshop because that's still an advantage to these people and still massive profit margins for these corporations. We thought the likelihood of you being able to enforce successful economic zones was unlikely. We thought the existence of widespread economic zones was unlikely. What we thought was exceptionally likely in this debate is that you changed fundamentally the role and responsibility of states to their individuals, which is the worst thing you can do in the worst developing countries in the world. And for those reasons, we were very proud to oppose.